Something did not resolve the way it was supposed to. That is the honest beginning of this. Not the romantic framing of love finding its way despite the obstacles. Not the satisfying arc of two people who were always meant to be together, eventually arriving at the destination their connection was always pointing toward. Something simpler and less narratively tidy than either of those. The avoidant rejected the empath. The rejection was real, had real impact, left the empath in the specific disorienting, not quite cleanly stated condition of having received something that communicated ending without the honest directness that would have allowed a clear response. And then something did not resolve, in the avoidance interior, in the defended, managed, self-sufficient interior, that the rejection was supposed to have restored to its previous comfortable conditions. The restoration did not fully occur. That is the actual beginning of the story of why avoidants fall in love with the empath they once rejected. Not the avoidance realization of the empath's worth, not the distance producing clarity about what was genuinely present, the failure of the management to adequately resolve the interior back to the conditions that preceded the connection. The management's failure deserves honest examination because understanding it accurately prevents both the over-romanticking of the return and the cynical dismissal of it. The avoidance management of genuine feeling is sophisticated, has been developed over sufficient time and through sufficient application that it is genuinely efficient at most of what it is deployed against. The warmth of ordinary connections, the pleasant but ultimately low-stakes engagement that most relational dynamics involve, the specific quality of connection that sits at the surface of the interior without pressing against anything genuinely defended. The management handles these with the practiced ease of a system running well-established protocols in familiar territory. What it does not handle with the same efficiency is genuine impact, the specific, categorically different quality of having been in genuine contact with someone who is simply, completely, honestly themselves, whose authentic presence reached the interior before the defense could adequately mobilize, whose particular quality of being, the non-invested genuine interest, the warmth without agenda, the self-possession that does not perform itself, the depth that was earned rather than curated, established itself in the defended interior as the specific, named impression that genuine impact produces. That impression is not something the management was designed to eliminate. It was designed to prevent. And because the prevention failed, because the impact occurred before the defense could adequately address it, the management is now attempting the far more difficult task of reducing something already present rather than intercepting something approaching. Reducing what is already interior is different from preventing what is exterior. The management can intercept approach, cannot equally efficiently dissolve presence. The presence persists. That is the simple, honest, accurate account of what happens in the avoidance interior after the rejection. Not loudly, not as the acute, front of consciousness, constantly demanding attention presence of something that refuses to be ignored. In the quieter, more persistent, keeps returning without being summoned way of genuine impression, maintaining itself against the management's ongoing efforts to reduce it. The empath surfaces in the gaps. In the early hours before full wakefulness has organized the defenses back into their operational positions. In the specific quality of ordinary moments that carry the particular texture of what is absent. In the involuntary comparison that occurs when subsequent connections fail to have the quality that the empath's presence established as the honest reference point. The management addresses each surfacing, redirects, minimizes, finds the narrative frame that makes the surfacing smaller than what it actually is, constructs the version of the empath that is more manageable than the accurate version, slightly idealized in some moments, slightly reduced in others, never held at quite the honest scale of what was actually present. But the addressing is ongoing, is never complete, is the specific, resource-consuming, this keeps requiring attention quality of a management system that is working against something that has established itself in the interior, rather than simply processing what is approaching from outside. Over time, and this timeline is genuinely variable, cannot be predicted, differs significantly based on the specific avoidant and the specific conditions of their life after the rejection, the ongoing management cost begins to accumulate, not dramatically, not as the crisis of a system that has reached catastrophic failure, as the gradual, cumulative, slightly harder than before quality of a defended life that is working more than it was. That is spending more interior resources on the maintenance of the narrative than was required before the empath's impact was established. The defended life continues to function. The self-sufficiency narrative continues to run. The ordinary conditions of the avoidance life continue to be navigated with the practiced ease of someone whose management protocols are, in most conditions, still adequate. But adequate and what it was before are not the same thing. and the difference between them is the specific, not easily attributed to any single cause, texture of the defended life becoming slightly more effortful than the self-sufficiency narrative was suggesting it should be. The empath's genuine qualities are what make this accumulation inevitable rather than merely possible. If the empath had been someone whose impact was ordinary, whose presence, however pleasant, sat at the surface of the interior without pressing against anything genuinely defended, the management would have resolved the interior with its characteristic efficiency. The impression would have reduced over time. The defended life would have returned to something essentially equivalent to its previous conditions. The qualities that produce the falling in love after rejection are the qualities that prevent that efficient resolution. The authenticity, the specific, unperformed, not aimed at any particular effect quality of someone who is simply and completely themselves in whatever conditions they are in. This quality established itself in the avoidance interior as something the management cannot adequately represent in a reduced form without the reduction being visible as distortion. The accurate representation of genuine authenticity is genuine authenticity. Any reduction of it into something more manageable produces a version that the interior recognizes as not quite right relative to what was actually present. The non-invested genuine interest, the empath's specific quality of being genuinely curious about the avoidant without that curiosity being organized around a particular relational outcome. This quality produced something in the avoidance interior that the managed reconstruction cannot adequately replicate. The memory of being genuinely interested in without the interest being agenda-carrying has a specific, distinctive texture that does not survive the management's attempts to frame it in less significant terms. The self-possession that does not perform itself. The groundedness of someone whose interior stability is not contingent on the avoidance response or availability. This quality, having been felt directly, becomes the honest comparison against which the avoidance experience of their own contingency, the specific ways their interior stability was, in fact, supplemented by the empath's consistent investment, becomes more visible rather than less. The depth that difficulty produced, the specific, honest, not curated quality of someone whose genuine experience of genuine difficulty is present in who they are in a way that has made them more real rather than more defended. This quality does not reduce to something the management can adequately work with. It was present in the texture of actual engagement, cannot be satisfactorily reconstructed from memory in diminished form without the diminishment being felt as loss rather than as adequate resolution. These qualities together constitute what was present in the empath, and together they constitute what the management cannot adequately reduce. Each individually might have been addressable. Together they form the specific, irreducible, this is what genuine impact looks like impression that the management has been working against since the rejection, and that the management has not successfully eliminated. The falling in love that eventually follows the rejection is not a new event, is the accumulated, no longer containable arrival of what was always present becoming too insistent for the management to maintain at functional distance. The specific conditions that produce this threshold vary. Sometimes it is the prolonged experience of subsequent connections that consistently fail to have the empath's quality. The accumulation of evidence that what was rejected was categorically different from what is ordinarily available. Sometimes it is the specific, quiet moment of honest self-examination in which the defended life's actual adequacy is assessed without the narrative running its usual efficient interference. Sometimes it is neither of those, is the simple, unspectacular, I have been managing this for long enough that the management is exhausting itself quality of a system that has reached the limit of its efficient operation. Whatever produces the threshold being reached, what happens when it is reached is the specific, involuntary, this is what has always been here quality of genuine feeling becoming too present to maintain at the previous functional distance. The avoidant does not decide to fall in love with the empath they rejected. The falling was always happening in the interior. What changes is the management's capacity to maintain it at the distance that functional operation requires. The empath, when the avoidance falling eventually produces the behavioral movement toward them, has been living their own life. This is not incidental, is the specific, practically important condition of the empath at the moment the avoidant moves toward them, has been shaped by everything the post-rejection period produced, the genuine interior work, the reclamation of the self, the gradual return to genuine inhabitation of the ordinary days, the restoration of trust in their own perception, the specific, accumulated, hard-won understanding of what genuine mutual presence requires and what its absence feels like. The empath who receives the avoidance movement toward them is meaningfully different from the empath who was rejected. not in any quality that was absent and has been added. In the degree to which the genuine qualities were already present are now more fully inhabited, more honestly expressed, more the natural, unself-conscious, genuine baseline of someone who is more completely themselves than they were during the dynamic. The self-possession is more genuine, not performed against the pull of organizing around the avoidant, but simply present as the natural condition of someone who has been genuinely living their own life as the primary concern of their own interior. The clarity is more honest, not the effortfully maintained clarity of someone who is working to see accurately against the distortion of hope, but the natural settled clarity of someone whose genuine self-knowledge has developed through real engagement with real experience. The warmth is more complete, not the warmth that was reaching toward the connection and hoping for reciprocity, but the warmth of someone who has genuinely returned to themselves and whose warmth is now genuinely for the person in front of them rather than organized around the question of the connection's adequacy. This empath, more completely themselves, more genuinely present, more honestly inhabiting the full quality of who they actually are, is encountering the avoidance movement toward them from the most complete version of themselves that has been available to be encountered. What the avoidant encounters when they move toward this empath is the honest confrontation with something worth examining carefully. They encounter the same person. The authenticity that established itself in the interior is still present. The non-invested genuine interest is still genuine. The self-possession that does not perform itself is still not performing itself. The depth that difficulty produced has been deepened by additional genuine difficulty, the post-rejection period, and its honest engagement with what it produced. And they encounter someone who is not organized around their return, not waiting for it, not performing non-waiting as the strategy for appearing not to be waiting, actually not organized around it, actually inhabiting their own life as the primary concern of their own interior. That specific quality, the genuine elsewhere-ness of someone who has genuinely returned to themselves, is part of what the avoidant encounters when they move toward the rejected empath. And it is both deeply familiar and genuinely disorienting in the specific conditions of the return. Familiar because it was always one of the empath's genuine qualities. The not organized around the avoidant quality was present in the original dynamic. However much the empath's genuine investment in the connection was simultaneously also present. The groundedness was always there, was one of the things that produced the falling. Disorienting because, in the original dynamic, the empath's genuine investment was also present and was organizing a significant portion of the interior around the connection's possibility. Now the investment has genuinely reorganized. The empath is warm but not hoping in the same way, genuinely interested but not monitoring, open but not organized around a particular outcome. The avoidance return is received by someone whose warmth is real and whose primary orientation is genuinely elsewhere. That combination, genuine warmth alongside genuine non-organization around the return, is simultaneously the most attractive and the most genuinely demanding thing the avoidant can encounter. Most attractive because it is the fuller, more complete version of what produced the falling in the first place. Most demanding because it does not provide the compensating investment that allows the pattern to continue without adequate reciprocity. The honest question of what the return actually is, genuine development, or the acute motivation of the management's exhaustion, receives its answer in the only place it has ever received its honest answer, the ordinary days, not the return itself, which can be motivated by the acute conditions of threshold reaching and can carry genuine feeling without carrying the demonstrated capacity for genuine sustained showing up, not the significant moments of the early period of the return, which tend to have the heightened quality of the acute motivation still operating, not the expressed intentions, however sincerely held in the moment of their expression, the ordinary days, the unremarkable Tuesdays and Wednesdays, the specific, undramatic, nobody is noting it texture of the dynamic in its ordinary conditions, whether the warmth is genuinely present then, whether the showing up continues then, whether the effort is visible in the unremarkable hours or concentrated in the motivated moments. The empath attending to the ordinary days with honest, settled, genuine perception, the perception that the post-rejection interior work developed and that the management's attempts to make the empath doubt their own accurate sensing were not successful in eliminating, will know what the ordinary days are showing, not from analysis, from the honest, body-level, felt-before-thought perception of someone whose intuition was always accurate and whose trust in that accuracy has been genuinely restored. The warmth that is the baseline feels different from the warmth that is the peak. Genuine presence feels different from managed presence. The showing up that comes from genuine development feels different from the showing up that comes from acute motivation. The empath knows the difference, has always known it, has been taught to doubt the knowing, and has recovered the knowing through genuine engagement with their own interior. They will know what the ordinary days are showing. And their life will continue regardless. That is not the resigned statement of someone who has accepted that the avoidant may not demonstrate genuine development. It is the honest, settled, genuinely inhabited condition of someone whose life is genuinely complete without requiring any particular outcome from the avoidant's return. The ordinary days that belong to the empath are full, are genuine, are the actual substance of an actual life being actually lived by someone who has done real work on themselves and is living from the real results of that work. The avoidance return, whether it demonstrates genuine development in the ordinary conditions or reveals the pattern finding its next phase, is one thing happening in a life that contains many genuine things, not the central thing, not the validation of everything that preceded it, not the completion of something that was waiting to be completed. One genuine thing in a genuinely full life, received honestly, with genuine warmth, without requiring it to be more than what it actually demonstrates itself to be. That is the honest position, grounded, warm, clear, present to what is actually happening in the ordinary days that are and have always been the whole of the thing. Not because the romantic resolution is not worth wanting, it is worth wanting, but because the ordinary days are where everything real actually lives, including whatever the return actually is, including whatever the empath genuinely is, including whatever comes next, all of it here, all of it real, all of it in the ordinary days that belong completely and without condition to the person living them, right now, which is where the truth has always been. The ordinary days after the avoidance return are where the honest story actually begins, not where it concludes. That distinction matters because the return itself, however genuinely motivated, however real the feeling that produced it, is a single event, a moment, and moments, however significant, do not constitute the sustained behavioral reality that genuine change requires to be something more than acute motivation finding temporary expression. The sustained behavioral reality lives in what follows the moment, in the specific, cumulative, unremarkable texture of how the dynamic actually operates when the heightened conditions of the return have settled, and what remains is simply the ordinary daily reality of two people attempting something together. That ordinary daily reality is where genuine change either proves itself or reveals its limits, not in the declaration of intention, not in the genuine feeling that motivated the return, not in the quality of the early period when the acute motivation is still operating at sufficient intensity to produce behavior that the ordinary conditions would not sustain on their own. In the ordinary days, the Tuesday afternoon, the Wednesday evening, the unremarkable Thursday where nothing particular is happening, and the question is simply what the dynamic is producing as its baseline. The empath attending to that baseline is not monitoring anxiously, is not tracking every interaction for the pattern's familiar signatures, is simply present to what is actually happening with the honest, settled quality of someone whose genuine perception has been restored and whose self-knowledge is sufficient to recognize what the texture of each ordinary day is actually communicating. That honest, settled presence is genuinely different from what the empath brought to the original dynamic. In the original dynamic, the empath's perception was partially colored by hope, by the genuine investment in the connection's potential, by the specific sustaining quality of believing that the gap between the avoidance interior and behavioral expression would eventually close if the empath remained genuinely present and genuinely loving. That hope colored the perception in specific ways, made the generous interpretation of ambiguous evidence the natural default, made the occasional unguarded warmth feel more representative of the genuine baseline than it actually was, made the management's intermittent reduction more visible than the management's sustained presence. The empath who has done genuine interior work in the post-rejection period has a different relationship to the perception. Not hope-free, genuine warmth for the specific person is still real and still present. But the hope is no longer doing the interpretive work, is no longer the filter through which ambiguous evidence is processed in the direction most compatible with the connection's possibility. The perception is cleaner, more directly in contact with what is actually showing rather than what the hope was constructing from what was showing. What that cleaner perception actually reveals in the ordinary days of the return is worth describing honestly rather than abstractly. It reveals the specific, daily, unremarkable quality of whether the showing up is happening or not the peak showing up of the significant moments, the ordinary showing up of the Wednesday evening when nothing is requiring anything in particular. Is the warmth present then, not the performance of warmth as the ongoing demonstration that the return was genuine. The actual, unprompted, nothing is requiring this warmth of someone who is simply glad to be in connection with the specific person. Is the effort visible then? Not the concentrated effort of the motivated moments when the acute conditions of the return are still operating at sufficient intensity. The distributed, ordinary, this is simply what I am doing effort of someone whose genuine development produces consistent showing up as the natural behavioral expression of the interior state rather than the motivated performance of it. Is the presence genuine then, not the heightened, fully engaged presence of someone who is consciously demonstrating their availability? The ordinary, settled, this is simply how I am here presence of someone who is genuinely in the connection without the connection being the project they are currently working on? These qualities, the ordinary warmth, the distributed effort, the settled, genuine presence, are what genuine development looks like when it has had sufficient time and sufficient genuine engagement to become the actual baseline rather than the acute expression of threshold-crossing motivation. The avoidant attempting genuine change in the ordinary conditions is doing the specific, unglamorous, nobody-is-watching work of someone who is trying to inhabit a new interior position in the actual conditions where the old one was most comfortable. The old position was managed distance, was the practiced, efficient, largely automatic maintenance of emotional management in the conditions of genuine intimacy, was not requiring conscious effort because it had been the default long enough to have become genuinely habitual. The new position, genuine presence, genuine warmth as the baseline, genuine effort in the ordinary hours, requires the ongoing, conscious, sometimes effortful choosing of something that is not yet the default. That runs against the architecture's grain in ways that the old position did not. That requires the sustained engagement of someone who is not simply expressing what comes naturally, but is choosing what is genuinely better over what is genuinely familiar. That choosing is real work, is genuine courage in the specific, undramatic, daily form that genuine relational courage tends to actually take, not the single dramatic moment of decisive action. The repeated, ordinary, this is what I am choosing again today quality of someone who keeps showing up even when the showing up requires overriding the pull of the familiar. Some days that work produces the genuine warmth and the genuine effort and the settled genuine presence. Some days the pattern's pull is stronger than the day's available capacity to override it. The management asserts in some form. The distance appears briefly. The familiar texture surfaces. The honest assessment holds both. Neither the occasional pattern assertion meaning the change is not genuine, nor the genuine warmth of the good days obscuring what the aggregate is actually showing. The aggregate, over sufficient time, in the ordinary conditions. There is something worth saying about what the empath's post-rejection development actually provides in the conditions of the genuine return, something that goes beyond the empath simply being in a better position to assess the return honestly. The empath who has genuinely inhabited their own life, who is more completely themselves, more genuinely present to the actual content of their actual days, more honestly self-knowing, creates specific conditions in the dynamic that were not present in the original. The conditions of genuine mutuality, not performed mutuality. The actual naturally arising, both people bringing their genuine selves, quality of a dynamic where neither person is primarily organized around managing the connection's conditions. In the original dynamic, the empath was significantly organized around the connection, was reaching, hoping, interpreting, investing, was bringing genuine authenticity but also bringing significant investment in the connection's possibility as a primary interior concern. That investment was real and genuine. It was also creating the compensating presence that allowed the avoidance pattern to continue without the full cost being felt. The empath who has genuinely returned to themselves in the post-rejection period is not organized around the connection in the same way, is warm and genuinely present, and is also genuinely primarily concerned with their own actual life, rather than with the connection's direction, as the primary question of the interior. That genuine primary self-orientation is not selfishness, is the specific, healthy, genuinely mutual enabling condition of someone who is in the connection from a full place rather than from the partially depleted place that organizing around another person's availability tends to produce. And it creates conditions in the return that the original dynamic did not have, conditions where the avoidance showing up is actually required to sustain the connection, rather than the empath's compensating investment doing most of the sustaining. Conditions where genuine mutuality is the only available foundation, because neither person is willing or able to compensate indefinitely for the other's insufficient contribution. These conditions are genuinely more demanding of the avoidance development than the original dynamics conditions were, and they are therefore genuinely more revealing of whether the development has occurred. Cannot be navigated through the management in the same way the original dynamic could be, because the compensating investment is not available to make the management's insufficiency non-consequential. The revealing nature of these conditions is worth sitting with honestly from the empath side. Because creating conditions that reveal the truth of what is actually happening is not a strategy, is not the deliberate construction of a test for the avoidance genuine change, is simply the natural consequence of the empath being genuinely themselves rather than partially organized around the connections management. The empath is not creating these conditions for the purpose of revealing anything, is simply being who they are in the genuine way that genuine interior work produces. And who they genuinely are is someone whose primary orientation is toward their own life, rather than toward the maintenance of any particular connection's viability. That genuine orientation naturally creates the conditions where what is actually happening in the dynamic must come from both people's genuine contribution rather than from one person's compensating investment, not as a demand, as the natural structural reality of a dynamic where only one person is providing the full quality of genuine presence. What the empath wants from this return, honestly, from the interior rather than from the hope-colored reading of what the return is supposed to produce, is worth naming directly, not the validation of the original investment. That wanting is understandable and worth acknowledging honestly, but it is not what the empath genuinely needs from the return in order for the return to be worth receiving. What the empath genuinely wants is the actual experience of genuine mutual presence, of the baseline warmth, of the ordinary showing up that is not concentrated in the motivated moments, of being in a dynamic where the connection is sustained by both people's genuine contribution rather than by one person's significant compensating investment. That is what the return could become, if the avoidance development is genuine and durable, if the ordinary days demonstrate what the return was suggesting, and that is also what the empath's own life already contains in various forms, without requiring the avoidance return to provide it. The genuine friendships, the meaningful work, the honest engagement with the actual content of the actual days. The return could add something genuine to a life that is already genuinely full, could not complete something that would otherwise be incomplete, could not validate something that requires external validation to be real. The empath's life is real. Their qualities are real. Their capacity for genuine love is real. Their worth is real. None of that requires the avoidance return to be confirmed, and the return, received from that foundation, from the genuine, non-contingent, fully inhabited life that does not require any particular outcome to be what it is, can be received honestly, for what it actually is, in the form it actually demonstrates, not more, not less, simply what it is, in the ordinary days, where everything real actually lives. The love that the avoidant fell into after the rejection was always the love they were falling into before it. The rejection was the management's response to a falling that was already occurring. The management produced the behavior of rejection, did not produce the absence of genuine feeling. The feeling was present before the rejection and remained present through it and after it. What changes in the period after rejection? For some avoidance, in some conditions, through the specific combination of accumulated cost and genuine honesty that can eventually produce genuine reckoning, is the capacity to let that feeling become something more than the management's contained, interior, not finding behavioral expression reality. The capacity to let the love become visible, actionable. The actual, expressed, I am choosing you in the ordinary day's reality, rather than the interior, unacted upon, persisting despite the management reality. That capacity is what genuine development produces, and its presence or absence is what the ordinary days will show. The empath knows how to read the ordinary days, has learned through the specific, costly, genuinely irreplaceable education of this experience, is warm, is clear, is genuinely inhabiting their own life, and is present, honestly, openly, without requiring any particular outcome, to whatever the ordinary days actually show. That is the whole position, complete, real, genuinely inhabited, entirely theirs, in the ordinary days, which are, as they have always been and will always be, the whole of the thing. The ordinary days after the return continue regardless of what the return means. That is worth starting with plainly. Because the tendency, once the return has happened and the honest assessment is underway, is to treat the ordinary days primarily as the evidence-gathering period, as the time during which the truth about the return will be revealed, as the interim between the return's arrival and the conclusion that the honest assessment eventually produces. But the ordinary days are not primarily the evidence-gathering period. They are the actual life, happening now, with their own genuine content that exists independently of what the avoidance return is or is not demonstrating. The work continues. The genuine friendships continue. The specific interests and engagements and the honest interior life that the post-rejection period developed continue. All of it continues in the ordinary days alongside whatever the return is producing, not as the backdrop against which the main drama of the return is playing out, as the actual substance of the actual life. The empath holding both simultaneously, the honest assessment of what the return is showing and the genuine inhabitation of the actual life, is doing something that sounds simpler than it actually is. Because the return activates something. However grounded the empath is, however genuinely they have returned to themselves, the specific person who rejected them and is now moving toward them activates the genuine feeling that was always real, the warmth, the specific quality of caring about this particular person, the memory of what was genuine in the original connection. That activation is not a failure of the post-rejection work, is not the evidence that the reclamation was incomplete or that the empath has regressed to the organized around the avoidant position they genuinely moved from. It is simply the honest expression of genuine feeling persisting in the way genuine feeling persists. Real love does not switch off because an honest assessment has been reached, does not become inert because the person has done genuine interior work, remains present as the real thing it is, alongside the genuine self-possession and the honest perception and the genuine inhabitation of the ordinary life. Both present, the feeling and the grounding, neither canceling the other. What that simultaneous presence actually feels like in the ordinary days deserves honest description. Some moments the feeling is louder than the grounding. The specific quality of the avoidance genuine warmth in a particular exchange lands with a weight that the grounding is not suppressing or managing but simply coexisting alongside. The person is warm toward the avoidant, genuinely, not as performance. Some moments the grounding is what is most present. The clear-eyed, honest, this is what the aggregate is showing quality of someone who is attending to the ordinary days with the perception the post-rejection work produced. The person is clear, genuinely, not as protection. Most moments neither is particularly prominent. The ordinary days are simply ordinary. The dynamic is simply present in whatever texture it is currently presenting. The empath is simply in their life. Both the feeling and the grounding are present as background conditions rather than as acute foreground experiences. That ordinariness is what genuine grounded love actually feels like in its daily texture, not the intense, acute, always significant quality of something that is perpetually at the center of the interior, the quieter, more settled, present without consuming quality of something that has found its appropriate place in a life that contains many genuine things. The avoidant in the ordinary days of the return is also simply in their life, attempting what they are attempting, with whatever genuine development has or has not occurred, with whatever the management's remaining efficiency or reduced efficiency is producing in the actual behavioral conditions. They are not primarily the subject of this empath's interior, are present in it as someone genuinely cared about, are not the organizing concern of it the way they were in the original dynamic. That shift from primary organizing concern to genuinely cared about person who is not the center is perhaps the most fundamental change the post-rejection period produced, and it is the change that makes what happens now genuinely different from what happened before. Before, the empath's interior was significantly organized around the avoidant. The monitoring, the hoping, the generous interpretation, the sustained investment in the connection's possibility. All of that was the avoidant occupying a disproportionate share of the empath's interior resources. Now the avoidant occupies the place that genuine caring occupies in a full life, real, present, worth attending to honestly. Not disproportionate, that is genuine change in the empath. Quiet, non-dramatic, not announced, simply present in the actual texture of how the interior is organized now compared to before. What the honest assessment of the return's ordinary days eventually produces depends entirely on what the ordinary days actually show. If they show genuine sustained warmth as the baseline, if they show effort in the unremarkable hours, if they show the specific, small, consistent details of someone who is choosing the connection when nothing is requiring the choosing to be anything in particular. if they show the gradual, imperfect, genuine development of someone whose interior work is finding its way into behavioral expression with sufficient consistency that the body's calibration, the nervous system's honest register of what is reliably present, begins to update towards something more settled than the vigilant monitoring of the original dynamic required. Then the honest assessment produces the recognition of genuine change, not perfect change, not the transcendence of the pattern. The genuine, imperfect, this is actually different in character from what preceded. It quality of someone whose development is real and is showing in the ordinary conditions. That recognition does not require announcement or drama. It is simply the honest register of what the ordinary days are genuinely showing. If the ordinary days show something else, the warmth concentrating in the motivated moments and reducing in the ordinary ones, the effort visible when the stakes feel high and less visible when nothing is requiring it, the familiar texture of avoidant engagement reasserting across the unremarkable hours, the specific recognizable quality of the pattern finding its next phase rather than genuinely changing. Then the honest assessment produces a different recognition, equally honest, equally received without drama or announcement, simply the clear-eyed register of what the ordinary days are genuinely showing. Either recognition, the genuine change, or the pattern's persistence, is received by the empath from the same grounded, warmly honest, genuinely inhabited life position, not with relief if the change is genuine, not with devastation if the pattern persists. With the specific, settled, this is what is actually true quality of someone whose primary orientation is toward their own genuine life, and whose honest perception is available to register what is actually present rather than what the hope or the hurt would prefer. That position is the most honest available, is also genuinely the most free. Free in the specific sense of not requiring any particular outcome from the avoidance return to maintain its quality. The empath who receives genuine change honestly is the same empath who would receive the pattern's persistence honestly. Not because the two outcomes are emotionally equivalent, they are not, but because the empath's capacity to receive either honestly from the same grounded position means the empath's own well-being is not contingent on the outcome. That non-contingency is the whole of what genuine reclamation produces that is most durable and most genuinely valuable, not the particular relational outcome, the capacity to be genuinely present to whatever the outcome actually is, from a life that is genuinely full in the ordinary days, that are the whole of it, right now, as they have always been.